France is not collapsing overnight. There are no bank runs in the streets, no emergency summits broadcast every hour, no sudden default headlines flashing across global markets. And that is precisely what makes this crisis so dangerous. Because behind the image of stability, behind the cafes, the protests, the familiar political theater, France is drifting toward a fiscal and political breaking point that few are willing to confront honestly. This is not a story about a single bad budget. It is not about one failed government, and it is not about one unpopular reform. This is the story of a nation trapped in a vicious cycle, where promises made decades ago can no longer be paid for. Voters refuse to give them up. Politicians lack the power to act, and the cost of delay grows larger every single year. At the center of it all lies one number that keeps rising: France's public debt. Part 1. The scale of the problem. France today is running one of the largest public sectors in the developed world. Public spending consumes nearly 57% of the country's GDP. That is not a temporary emergency level. That is not a pandemic anomaly. That is the baseline. And the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. France owes debt to GDP ratio is already among the highest in Europe, and forecasts suggest it could rise to 125% or even 150% within the next decade. To put that into perspective, at those levels, debt is no longer just a background statistic. It becomes the dominant force shaping national policy, economic growth, and political stability. The higher the debt climbs, the fewer choices remain, and France is running out of room. Part 2. The welfare state. Pride and pressure. France's social model is deeply rooted in national identity, healthcare, unemployment benefits, family allowances, and above all, pensions. For generations, the French state promised security from cradle to grave, and for a long time it worked. But what once symbolized solidarity is now becoming the single largest strain on public finances: the pension problem. France's pension system is exceptionally generous by international standards. In some cases, retirement payouts exceed the average wages of active workers. That imbalance alone should raise alarms, but demographics make it far worse. France is aging. Like most developed nations, it faces longer life expectancy, fewer children, a shrinking workforce. The ratio of workers paying into the system to retirees drawing from it is steadily deteriorating. This is not a temporary fluctuation. It is a structural shift, and structurally, the system does not balance. Each year, the state must borrow more to fulfill promises made in the past. Debt fills the gap. Part 3. Why reform is so difficult. From a purely economic perspective, the solutions are well known. Raise the retirement age, reduce benefits, increase contributions, or some combination of all three. But economics is not the real obstacle. Politics is. A nation that resists change. France has a long tradition of protest. Mass demonstrations are not an exception. They are a political tool. When President Emmanuel Macron pushed through pension reforms in 2023, raising the retirement age, the response was immediate and explosive. Millions took to the streets. Strikes paralyzed transport. Cities shut down. The message was clear. Any attempt to reduce benefits, even modestly, comes at an enormous political cost. And that cost has shaped every government since. Political instability and gridlock. France has cycled through prime ministers at a rapid pace. Parliament is fragmented. No faction holds decisive power. Coalitions are fragile and short-lived. This creates paralysis. Major reforms require political capital, time, and public trust. France currently lacks all three. As a result, governments delay. They compromise. They postpone hard decisions. And every year of delay makes the problem worse. Part 6. Why this is a Eurozone problem. This is not just France's crisis. That point cannot be overstated. France is not a peripheral economy on the edge of Europe. It is not a small member whose problems can be quietly absorbed or ring-fenced. France is the second largest economy in the Eurozone, and together with Germany, it forms the political and economic backbone of the entire European project. When a smaller country struggles, Greece, Portugal, or even Italy at certain moments, the system bends, intervenes, and absorbs the shock. But if France struggles, the system does not bend. It shakes. A weakened France undermines the Eurozone on multiple levels at once. Credibility of the Eurozone. The Euro is built on trust that its largest members are fiscally sound and politically stable. France has long been expected to stand shoulder to shoulder with Germany as a guarantor of that trust. When France's debt rises unchecked and reforms stall, it raises uncomfortable questions. If France cannot stabilize its finances, who can? If one of the core countries struggles, what does that say about the system itself? This erosion of credibility does not happen overnight, but once it starts, it is very hard to reverse. Breakdown in fiscal coordination. The Eurozone depends on coordination. Rules around deficits, debt limits, and fiscal discipline only work if the largest countries respect them, or at least appear to. When France repeatedly pushes those limits, it weakens enforcement across the bloc. Other countries take note. Discipline erodes, exceptions multiply. What was meant to be a shared framework becomes a political negotiation. Political unity under pressure. France is not just an economic pillar. It is a political one. A fiscally constrained France has less room to lead on European defense, on industrial policy, on competition with the US and China. Instead of shaping Europe's future, France risks becoming consumed by domestic survival. And when France retreats inward, Europe fragments outward. The ECB's impossible balancing act. France's situation also places immense pressure on the European Central Bank. The ECB already walks a tightrope. Raise rates to fight inflation. Lower rates to protect financial stability. A heavily indebted France makes that balance even harder. Higher rates increase France's borrowing costs. Lower rates risk inflation and moral hazard. The more France's debt problem grows, the harder it becomes to isolate, and the more the entire Eurozone feels the strain. Part 7. Political extremes and market anxiety. As confidence in traditional governance erodes, voters look elsewhere. This is not unique to France, but in France the shift is especially pronounced. Mainstream parties struggle to govern, coalitions fracture, reforms stall. Into that vacuum step political extremes on both the far right and the far left. Though they differ sharply in ideology, they share a critical similarity. They promise more, not less, more spending, more protection, more benefits, more state involvement. From a market perspective, this is deeply unsettling. Why markets react so strongly? Markets do not vote. They price risk, and what they see is rising uncertainty. As France moves closer to elections, especially the pivotal 2027 presidential race, investors begin asking hard questions. Will existing reforms be reversed? Will pension changes be undone? Will deficits expand further? Will debt accelerate faster than expected? These questions do not need answers to have an effect. Uncertainty alone raises borrowing costs. Risk premiums increase. Spreads widen. Financing becomes more expensive before any policy is even enacted. Political unpredictability as an economic cost. France is entering a period where political outcomes are increasingly difficult to forecast. That unpredictability becomes a tax on the economy. Businesses delay investment. Households grow cautious. Capital becomes more selective. And the longer uncertainty persists, the more it feeds back into the debt problem itself. Part 8. The trap tightens. At this point, France is no longer facing a single problem. It is trapped in a self-reinforcing cycle. Let's break it down clearly. The population resists cuts because benefits feel earned and essential. The state cannot afford existing promises because demographics and debt make them unsustainable. Politicians lack the mandate to act because reforms provoke backlash and instability. Markets grow more cautious because uncertainty increases risk. Borrowing becomes more expensive because confidence erodes. And that higher cost of borrowing feeds directly back into the deficit. Each element strengthens the next. There is no clean exit. This is not a sudden crisis like a bank collapse or currency crash. It is a slow erosion. And slow erosions are the hardest to stop because they don't force immediate action. They allow delay. They encourage denial. They reward procrastination until suddenly they don't. Part 9. A symbolic glimmer of hope. Notre Dame. Amid all this, one story stands apart. The restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral. When fire tore through one of France's most iconic landmarks, the response was extraordinary. There was no paralysis. No endless debate, no political gridlock. Leadership was decisive. Funding was mobilized rapidly. Private and public sectors cooperated. Political divisions were set aside. The project moved forward with clarity, urgency, and national pride. It became a symbol of what France can achieve when objectives are clear. Authority is established. The nation unites behind a shared mission. But this comparison also highlights the challenge. Rebuilding a cathedral, even one as complex as Notre Dame, is finite. Reforming a fiscal system built over decades is not. It touches every citizen, every generation, every election. The question is not whether France has the capability. It is whether it has the political courage to apply that spirit to something far more complex and far more painful. Part 10. What happens? If nothing changes, if current trends continue, the mathematics of debt become unforgiving. There is no ideology here, no political spin, just arithmetic, debt compounds. Interest payments rise, growth slows, political tensions intensify. As options narrow, flexibility disappears. Eventually, reform stops being a choice. It becomes an emergency. History is clear on this point. Reforms imposed by crisis are always harsher than reforms chosen in advance. They come with less control, more social pain, greater economic disruption. France still has agency, but that agency is shrinking. Part 11. The central question. France still has time, but time is no longer abundant. The real issue is not whether solutions exist. They do. They are well understood. They have been debated for years. The real question is simpler and far more difficult. Can France's political system deliver those solutions before markets lose patience? Because markets do not wait forever, and once confidence breaks, it is extraordinarily difficult to restore. That question remains unanswered. A nation at a crossroads. France now stands at a crossroads. Between comfort and sustainability, between promises made and promises that can realistically be kept. Between political paralysis and decisive leadership. The path forward will not be easy. It will require sacrifice, honesty, and political courage, but avoiding the problem will be far more costly. This is not just a fiscal crisis. It is a test of political will, national identity, and Europe's future, and the clock is ticking.